So the 2023 F1 season is over, and although it can probably be summarised pretty easily in the following 5 seconds...
Formula 1 in 2023 is go! Max Verstappen dominates the Formula 1 in 2023!
Well, where's the fun in that? With 22 races, could have been 24 had China not pulled out and Imola been turned into Atlantis, but still 22 full F1 races and 6 sprints to boot. With sprint races being a sight so vile that according to some members in the F1 community, it genuinely makes them want to throw up. But with the scene now set and all those races to go through, let's get into my review of the 2023 Formula 1 season. Starting off as per usual now in Bahrain for the first race of the year, and very early on we learnt quite a few things. First off being that Red Bull were absolutely dominant. The second of which is that Ferrari can't be relied upon to finish a race, as while running third in this one, Charles Leclerc's car died. However, that Leclerc DNF did make room for Fernando Alonso to return to the podium, with the ancient set of eyebrows back on the third step for just the second time since 2014. A time so long ago that Mercedes' dominance had just began, Germany were winning their 4th World Cup, and Manchester United were still relevant in the Premier League. However, Bahrain really was a chance for Alonso to showcase his talent as he stole the show and stole the headlines, as he and F1's other resident dinosaur Lewis Hamilton engaged in a duel lasting multiple laps and a great sight to see, but Alonso did come out on top and took Carlos Sainz to get that 3rd place in behind both Red Bulls to start the year. Into the second round, and Red Bull were looking to recreate their 1-2 from the previous race. Just to say, the RB19 had other ideas, with the car faults meaning Max Verstappen qualified down in 15th. Still, not as bad as Lewis Hamilton the year before though. Onto the race then, and Alonso did manage to take the lead away from Sergio Perez, Fernando starting in 2nd and Perez in 1st. That lead lasted for about 3 laps. As Red Bull getting past things was really the storyline of this one, with Max Verstappen making his way all the way up to P2 just halfway through race distance, lap 25 of 50. The Dutchman slicing through drivers like Anakin Skywalker does younglings. However, this did leave the Red Bulls 1-2 with Sergio Perez taking the win, and us genuinely asking the question early on of, could Checo be challenging for the world title? Round 3 and we were headed to the land of the upside down, or as it would later be known, land of the what the duck, not another red flag. This was started off by Sergio Perez in qualifying, who had decided that clearly having Max Verstappen as a World Championship rival wasn't a hard enough task and that he needed to start as far back as he could, with the Mexican electing to do that by crashing on his very first lap of qualifying. Onto the race though, and Max decided he didn't want to make it too easy on himself, and so let both George Russell and Lewis Hamilton by to give Mercedes a 1-2. You know, just to give them a little bit of hope. At which point, Alex Albon decided that his Williams didn't require any front wings or rear wings, as he went crashing into the wall at turn 6, which brought out the first red flag of the race. But onto the restart, and Max Verstappen waited an entire 2 laps before retaking first place, getting past Lewis Hamilton and leading the Australian Grand Prix. At this point, things were looking pretty stable until just a few laps from the end, Kevin Magnussen's rear right tyre told him to go get stuffed, as he drove into the wall at the exit of turn 2, and this brought out a second red flag, as I say, with just 3 laps remaining.
Not another one?
And so then, when we did restart, well, it was absolute chaos. Sainz tagged Alonso, Logan Sargent tried driving through Nick de Vries, and then the 2 Alpines turned their cars into a blended smoothie. Oh, and Lance Stroll just drove off into the gravel and got stuck for no reason. However, the restart was based off of the previous order, and so this left Max Verstappen still in 1st, Fernando Alonso still in 3rd, and Lewis Hamilton taking Sergio Perez's spot on the newly named Max Verstappen podcast. On to Baku then, and the first of the 6 sprint rounds, which George Russell used to good effect, electing to drive into the side of Max, giving us this brilliant moment of Karen Verstappen post-race, showing George that he had scratched his Red Bull. Fast forward to race day, and a surprise from Leclerc in qualifying meant that he was on pole position. I mean, for a total of 4 laps, it really didn't last long. And so with the Red Bulls getting by, it was at this point where Nick de Vries in the AlphaTauri elected to showcase his talent by doing his best impersonation of Nicholas Latifi. deciding that he would for no reason drive into the wall, breaking his car, which brought out the safety car. This helped Sergio Perez up at the front as he was able to jump Max Verstappen and take the lead. And it was genuinely at this point where nothing else happened. Sorry Baku, but you didn't really deliver on this one. Well, I say that, there was just one minor point of note where Esteban Ocon decided to make a pit stop on the final lap. Which, nothing wrong there. Provided all the people in the pit lane weren't stood in the way. With everyone scampering for their lives and just about managing to avoid becoming Alpine's evening meal. However, back onto the track and Leclerc did take that third place, showing just what can be done when his car doesn't die on him. On to Miami then, and sadly this year there was no Craig Slater deciding to go swimming on some cardboard. However, there was Charles Leclerc providing some action as he went and crashed his car during qualifying, electing to just throw it into the wall. This also left Max Verstappen down in P9, having not been able to set a lap time on his first of 2 runs. That brought us to Sunday and what I can only describe as one of my favourite moments of the entire year on Martin's grid walk, as Jackie Stewart decided he would fend off security in order to go and grab Roger Federer for an interview. But onto the race, and eyes were on Max Verstappen, given he was starting a bit further down the pack and would have to make his way up the field, with the Dutchman making it all the way up into second place by lap 15, which set up the Sergio Perez versus Max Verstappen showdown. With the two cars on opposite strategies, Sergio Perez on mediums to hards and Max Verstappen on hards to mediums, and with those fresh tyres towards the end, Max had closed up on Checo, and with just 10 laps to go they were on the same space of racetrack, with the Dutchman forcing his way past to take his next win, number 3 on the season and the 5th in the row for Red Bull. Other highlights of Miami include Charles Leclerc trying to pass Kevin Magnussen, literally all race long, and then Fernando Alonso congratulating Lance Stroll after seeing his overtake on the big screen, which would be alright if the overtake wasn't for 13th place and Donna Williams. However, Fernando was able to do that while cruising around in 3rd place, meaning that he finished back on the podium and took his place once again with the Red Bull drivers on Max Verstappen's show. On to round 6 in Imola then. Yeah, I think it's fair to say it was just a little bit too wet to go racing. I think sailing was probably more appropriate for this one. We then swiftly moved on to F1's resident snooze fest and Monaco, except this year, it wasn't. I mean, don't get me wrong, the first half of the race was classic Monaco, plus Lance Stroll driving into some walls. However, just over halfway through, the rain came down. We had George Russell going off, Perez then hitting Russell when rejoining, Ferrari just being Ferrari, leaving dry tyres on in the rain, Aston Martin also being Ferrari, putting dry tyres on when it started raining and throwing away their chance for the win. I'm not joking, they genuinely could have got the win with Alonso in this one. And while all this chaos and commotion was going on, Lance Stroll was still driving into walls. However, once the rain did calm down a bit, we got back into Monaco's procession, with everything leading to Alonso in 2nd place slotting in behind Max Verstappen, and in 3rd place it was Esteban Ocon, as we had both a new team and a new driver making their way onto the podium. This race also marked the start of the self-destruction sequence that was Sergio Perez's season, as his weekend went along the lines of crashing out in qualifying, crashing into Hülkenberg during the race, and then retiring. No, I didn't just forget to record Spain, it was just its normal boring self, even if they had removed the chicane for this year. But with that, we're swiftly on to Canada. And with a wet qualifying on Saturday, it was world champions in 1st, 2nd and 3rd. With Hamilton and Alonso quickly getting themselves involved with some action, Lewis up the inside to take P2 on the start and slot in behind Max. However, Fernando was not giving up, and a few laps later into the race, he eventually made his way back past Lewis and would hold on to that P2. Meanwhile, all this was going on, George Russell could see his teammate in a battle up ahead, and so he decided he'd pick a fight of his own, with the wall that is, on the exit of the chicane, breaking the right rear, the front wing, bringing out the safety car, and fundamentally ending his race as well. To top things off, it wasn't even the Wall of Champions, so make of that what you will. Meanwhile, over at Red Bull, and it was the 3rd consecutive recovery race for Sergio Perez, given his qualifying had become more useless than Lance Stroll and Aston Martin, but not quite as useless as a Nick de Vries and an AlphaTauri. As in a battle with Kevin Magnussen, he locked up, which took both of them to the runoff and both of them to the back of the pack. Up at the front though, it was a commanding win for Max Verstappen, with Alonso retaining that P2 and Hamilton coming home in P3. As for the second time this year, we had our World Champions edition of the Max Verstappen podcast. On to Austria, and the biggest talking point was McLaren. Well, besides track limits and them being more annoying than Christian Horner's voice. But McLaren had brought a big development update and applied it to Lando Norris's car. So sorry Oscar, you're going to have to wait for next time. But that did mean for Lando that his car was actually trying to race and no longer impersonating an Alfa Romeo. Into the sprints though, and it was Red Bulls at the front, as they headed up towards turn 3 with Max Verstappen just forgetting what the apex is. However, besides causing a traffic jam that filtered through the entire grid, for the rest of the race the Dutchman was commanding, taking home the sprint win. Onto the race though, and as I mentioned, it was Lando Norris making the most of his upgraded car, as instead of finishing down in 15th, 16th, 17th place, he was now making his way up to 4th. Meanwhile, Sergio Perez was using his dominant car to once again try and recover from qualifying in 15th place. In the mid-pack, and we did have a little gem of a season highlight, a 4-way battle between 4 cars from 4 different teams, providing some of the best action of the race. With Alex Albon, Kevin Magnussen, Esteban Ocon and Lance Stroll all involved in a 4-way. Fight, that is, 4-way fight on the racetrack, with all 4 of them wanting the same bit of road. And then finishing off, where drama was concerned, it was Max Verstappen calling the shots at Red Bull, as with the team telling him to just manage the tyres and we don't need to come in for the fastest lap. Well, Max just came in anyway, and so the team put the soft tyres on. He came out just a couple seconds ahead of Leclerc in second, but did get that fastest lap and another commanding win. Next up, we have Silverstone, aka the British Grand Prix. And surprise, surprise, we begin with Sergio Perez being absolutely appalling, not even making it out of Q1 on the Saturday. However, someone not appalling was the entire McLaren team, as with Lando Norris qualifying P2 and Oscar Piastri in P3, they were in prime position for some good points on Sunday. Plus, they were looking to take advantage, as on the start, Lando went up the inside of Max and took the lead at his home race, with Oscar also getting a good start in behind Max and looking to make a move, the pair almost going side by side into Copse, but Piastri elected not to pull a Lewis Hamilton on this one. Sadly for Norris though, that feeling of leading a race didn't last too long, as just 5 laps in, Max was back by, having got past at the end of the main straight. And to be honest, I think for Norris and everyone else, we all knew it was coming. At this point, things did start to settle, and with the action in a bit of a lull, there's always someone that we can turn to. It used to be Nicholas Latifi, however now it's Haas, as Kevin Magnussen pulled over with his car setting fire, bringing out a safety car roughly 2/3 of the way through the race. This did bunch the pack up, but unlike last year, sadly didn't provide any crazy action post-safety car, meaning that it was Max Verstappen taking the win with Norris in second, and Lewis Hamilton making it 2 Brits on the podium, having benefited from that late safety car. On to Hungary, and we begin with something other than Sergio Perez's poor qualifying. I mean, don't get me wrong, he was still down in 9th place, but we did have other news. As over at AlphaTauri, Nick De Vries had been dropped by the Red Bull bosses, and Daniel Ricciardo would be coming in to replace him for the rest of the season. With Nick De Vries highlights including crashing, and more crashing, along with a sprinkling of incredibly slow driving and just generally poor performances. In all honesty, he was so slow that you could probably call him Comcast Wi-Fi. Anyway, back to the action. Where were we? Yes, Sergio Perez not remembering how to qualify. As while he was down in 9th, someone having a good day was Lewis Hamilton, as he took his first pole position in almost 2 years. However, that P1 didn't last too long, as from first place he was down to 4th by just the 4th corner on the opening lap. In behind, and thanks to Zhou Guanyu, we had a couple of cars coming together, more specifically the Alpines. I mean, at least this time it wasn't their fault. However, as action goes for Hungary, that was about it, as besides the recovery drive from Checo and a few other overtakes here and there, it was a pretty dominant win from Verstappen by almost 34 seconds. Post-race, however, there was still more to come, as up on the podium, Lando Norris went and smashed Max Verstappen's trophy while opening the champagne. Clearly, Lando's now just taking the approach of if he can't get the first place trophy, well then no one can. Next up in Belgium, and after a dominant P1 where he took pole by 0.8 of a second, Max had been given a grid penalty, meaning that he'd be starting down in P6. This would give the likes of Perez and Leclerc a chance to lead the race. You didn't actually think I was going to say a chance to win the race, did you? However, before we could get to the main race, we did have our third sprint of the season, and one that, courtesy of the weather, did provide some good action, with people diving onto the intermediate tyres and pulling into the pits at the end of the first lap. However, a delay from Red Bull meant that Oscar Piastri had managed to jump Max Verstappen and take the lead of the sprint race, even just for a little while. Before Max was back by to take the win, what did you really expect? And on Sunday, I can only say it was a bit more of the same. It did take Max a little bit longer to get by people, all the way to lap 17 before he got past his teammate, but once by he did manage to pull out a 24-second lead and a 24-second win, with Sergio Perez in second place and Charles Leclerc taking third as we headed into the summer break. So after waiting for what felt like an eternity, we were finally back at this year's Dutch Grand Prix. Or well, 19 drivers were back at this year's Dutch Grand Prix. As in practice, it was what I can only call an Australian disaster, with Oscar Piastri crashing into the barrier at turn 3 and then Daniel Ricciardo crashing into the barrier in order to avoid hitting his fellow countrymen. However, while Oscar was completely fine, for Daniel the news wasn't too great. A broken thumb meant that he'd have to step out of the car and would miss this race along with the next few. This meant that for the second time in 3 races, AlphaTauri would need a replacement driver. So up stepped Nick No, I'm joking, I'm kidding. Instead, it was Liam Lawson who jumped into the AlphaTauri to try and showcase what he could do. And for a rookie jumping in, only getting free practice 3 and qualifying onwards, he would hope for a simple race come Sunday. The Dutch GP was anything but that. As before even the end of lap 1, the rain had started to come down. And when I say the rain came down, I don't mean that little bit of drizzle that you get on Monday mornings to make the start of the week feel even more depressing than it even is. But the rain did start coming down, and started coming down heavy enough that people were diving into the pit lane at the end of lap 1. Except for George Russell and Lando Norris, that is, who elected to stay out on their dry tyres in the rain so they could battle for the lead. Honestly, what is it with Lando and seemingly having a thing for dry tyres in the wet conditions? You'd think he'd be learning by now. Eventually though, it did dry out and we were back underway in dry conditions, until Logan Sargent drove straight on at turn 8 and sent his Williams into the wall. Honestly though, I'm not really too surprised. Turning right is something that the American drivers do tend to struggle with. After the Williams was cleared though and no longer sprawled throughout the runoff, we did have a patch of clear racing, with things settling down as they normally do, and we got to just a few laps from the end. And it was at this point where the rain really came down. I'm talking biblical levels of precipitation here. I'm talking go and grab your Noah's Ark, go and turn your car into a boat, and just try and stay on the grey stuff. As with it getting wetter and wetter, it eventually got too wet, to the point where Valtteri Bottas was one of a number of drivers to get caught out by turn 1, and the FIA decided that it was too dangerous and a red flag was needed. This brought the madness to a halt, and with just a couple of laps remaining, nothing much really changed, with Max Verstappen taking another win as he got his home Grand Prix for the 3rd year in a row and matched that record by Sebastian Vettel. Meanwhile, in behind, we had Fernando Alonso back onto the podium, along with Pierre Gasly in the Alpine making his one and only appearance. On to round 15, and on the Saturday, something quite bizarre had happened. It was Carlos Sainz in a Ferrari and on pole position. And so then on to the Sunday, after clearing away Yuki Tsunoda's AlphaTauri that couldn't be bothered to make it through the formation lap, we got underway, with the Ferrari genuinely leading the race at Monza for a good 15 laps or so as well, until a lock-up at turn 1 allowed Max Verstappen the opportunity he needed to get by Carlos Sainz and take the lead of the race. Meanwhile, in behind, and Verstappen's teammate Perez was pulling off what I can only describe as one of the biggest lies of the season. No, he wasn't trying to persuade the team that he was any good, but instead trying to persuade the stewards that this incident was George Russell forcing him off the track. Yeah, I'm not too sure on that one. However, over the next 30 laps or so, Checo did eventually make it past Russell and then up to the back of the Ferraris, where he got past Charles Leclerc and then eventually Carlos Sainz to put himself in second place, meaning that it was Leclerc versus Sainz, the two Ferraris, to fight over the final step of the podium at Monza. And you can imagine how that went, with the pair coming oh so close to taking each other out just a lap from the end, which would have been absolute disaster for the team and all their fans watching. However, the pair of them did manage to just about keep it clean, with Carlos Sainz staying ahead to take that third podium place behind a Red Bull 1-2. with Max Verstappen cruising to victory and what would be his record-setting 10th in a row. And I'm sure the Dutchman would be making it an easy 11th next time out in Singapore. So as it turned out, Singapore, not too easy. As in qualifying, there was only one Red Bull car that made its way into Q3, and that driver was I'm joking, it's not Sergio Perez. It was actually Liam Lawson. Not even Max Verstappen made it into Q3, as both the big boys at the big Red Bull team were knocked out by rookie Liam. However, Perez and Max did make it into Q2, which is more than could be said for Lance Stroll, as he went and destroyed his Aston Martin at the final turn. Though despite the destruction, I'm pretty sure a small part of his car might have crossed the line. You know, silver linings and all. Into the race though, and Sergio Perez spent his time crashing into things. First off was Yuki Tsunoda on the opening lap, meaning the Japanese driver was out of the race, and then Sergio went and punted Alex Albon, meaning that the Williams driver was out of the points. A Red Bull Junior driver? An ex-Red Bull driver? Coincidence? However, someone that needed no help to crash was Logan Sargent, as once again he struggled to turn right in what might be one of the saddest incidents I've seen all year.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it.
The reason this is important, as it brought out a safety car which allowed all of the front runners to pit, and also allowed Ferrari to screw it up, as per usual. As they took their 1-2 in the race, Leclerc behind Sainz, and swiftly turned it into a 1-6, with Sainz still in the lead, but Leclerc down in 6th place. So action resumes, and with the Red Bull looking out of it, it seemed like an easy win for Ferrari. That was until Esteban Ocon's car got involved as it died at the pit exit. This brought out a second safety car and allowed the two Mercedes to pit for fresh tyres, meaning that towards the end of the race they spent their time chasing down the front pack of Norris and then Sainz, seeing if they could take a win of their own. With the drama heading all the way to the final lap, and just a mere second separating all four cars with everyone having a chance to win. That was until George Russell went and ploughed into the wall, on the final lap with just a few corners to go. This obviously elevated his teammate Hamilton up into third as he slotted in behind Norris and Sainz, as this gave us our first non-Red Bull win of the season and also our first full guest edition of the Max Verstappen podcast. Only took 16 full rounds. On to round 17, and after making the horrendous decision to stay up all night rather than just getting up early, it was time for the Japanese Grand Prix. With what I can only say is probably one of the most action-packed turn ones of the entire year, with Verstappen and Norris going side by side at the front, 4 cars side by side and contact between Perez and Hamilton in behind, and then further back we had more contact, this time between Valtteri Bottas and Alex Albon. With everyone remarkably continuing, although Sergio Perez did have to pit to repairs, which sent him towards the back of the pack, where he'd have to drive and race alongside F1's resident snails, aka the Haas cars. And it was at this point where the Mexican promptly decided that his best chance of an overtake on Kevin Magnussen was to plough up the inside, lock up, and hit the Haas car. With the eventual damage, and to be honest more so the shame, meaning that he had to retire from the race, giving us this shot of Max Verstappen's pit stop, which honestly goes down as one of the most iconic moments of the season, and to be honest, one that sums it up pretty well. However, although we thought Checo's car was dead, it was actually resurrecting itself, as after being given a 5-second penalty, the team decided their best bet was to send him out onto the track around 30 laps down, serve the 5-second penalty, and then bring him back in order to avoid a grid drop for the next race, because, you know, they don't want to be starting back in 19th when they could be up in 16th place, do they? While all this was going on, further up the order, Mercedes were trying to keep Carlos Sainz behind, and failing. Oscar Piastri was also trying to keep pace with Lando Norris, and failing as well. But up ahead of everyone with a bounce-back Grand Prix was Max Verstappen, as he took a dominant win, showing everyone that Singapore was just a blip on the season. On to sprint number 4 now, and set in Qatar, it was Max Verstappen's chance to clinch the world title, with him just needing a non-score from Sergio Perez. So I'm sure the Mexican would be super careful to bring the car home and not get into any trouble. Never mind, it all got thrown away in a heated battle for 10th place. Up at the front of the sprint though, and it wasn't Verstappen in P1, but actually Oscar Piastri. He took a maiden win, albeit a sprint one, and still more than Lando Norris has achieved. On to the main event, which is the race, and I promise you this is the only point in the video where I'll bore you with the super interesting topic of tyre degradation, as the FIA had stated that all tyres could not go any further than 17 laps. This was to avoid being torn to shreds by the Qatar curbs, things that apparently do more damage than Lance Stroll in a Formula 1 car. However, someone that this 17-lap rule would mean absolutely nothing for was Lewis Hamilton, who, after 2 years of no wins, decided he'd go for it round the outside at turn 1 on the opening lap. It did not go well, as he crashed into Russell, taking himself out of the race and also relegating his teammate to the back of the pack. Toto Wolff for sure getting some mad PTSD from this one. Once that was over though, we could get back to the usual running of the race, also known as Max Verstappen leading from the start all the way to the finish. Not sure if you quite caught on yet, but that is a pretty familiar theme to this video. Oh, that and the usual Sergio Perez starting in the back half of the grid. Last place in fact for this one, as Sergio got a new high score. With Sergio starting all the way back, it meant that he did have to try and make his way through the pack. He didn't do that very well. Someone who did though was George Russell, as he went from the very last place on lap 1, second to last beside his gravel-stricken teammate, and managed to take his Mercedes all the way up into 4th place, slotting in just behind the McLarens and Max Verstappen, who, as mentioned before, sealed the World Championship for the 3rd year in a row this weekend in Qatar. On to round 19 in the USA and the Circuit of the Americas, with back-to-back sprints, and Max Verstappen on the Saturday heading straight back up to the top and taking the win in this one. However, on Sunday things were just a little bit different, with Max doing his very best Checo impersonation and qualifying down in 6th place, meaning he'd find himself in a battle with Lewis Hamilton and Lando Norris throughout the course of the Sunday, with Hamilton being passed in the pit stops and then Lando Norris being passed down the inside on track. Max was in the lead and things were looking okay, until they started to go wrong, as it turned out that the thing capable of slowing Max down was dodgy brakes, giving Hamilton and Norris a chance to close the gap, with Lewis getting by Lando and eventually closing the gap down to just 2 seconds across the line, which would have been a hard-earned P2 had the FIA not decided to get involved, as they disqualified Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc for both of them having excessive wear to the plank, aka the cars were too low. This elevated Sainz into 3rd place and Lando up to P2, and further down the pack, elevated Logan Sargent into P10 and his very first point in Formula 1. On to the home stretch then, and with the championship all wrapped up, it was on to Mexico and a chance for Sergio Perez to, end the season on a higher note, to achieve a podium, maybe even a race win at his home race. A chance for him to impress in front of the home crowd. And on the Saturday, he even qualified okay, just 2 spots in behind teammate Max Verstappen, albeit separated by a returning Daniel Ricciardo in the AlphaTauri, but we'll gloss over that. Where was I? Oh yes, a good Saturday. Sadly for Checo, that's where all the goodness ended, as down towards turn 1 he pulled off a prime Lewis Hamilton from Qatar, along with some added F1 acrobatics. This sent him to the showers after just the very first corner, out of the race at turn 1. I mean, technically not even the first corner if you really want to rub salt in the wounds, but I'd never do something like that. Back to the race though, and with things looking pretty tame, we turn to the Haas cars for them to do what they do best and cause red flags, as a big accident for Kevin Magnussen with his rear left tyre just giving up mid-corner, sending him to the barrier, sprawling debris everywhere and needing repairs to the wall, meaning that we had a red flag. Following the restart though, there really wasn't too much going on, besides Lando Norris having to recover from a terrible restart, and the Ferrari engineers telling Leclerc that Hamilton's tyres would drop off soon, and telling him that pretty much for the rest of the race. But besides those, there wasn't too much to talk about, and so Max Verstappen took another win, his 16th of the season. On to round 21 now, and we head to Brazil and Interlagos for the final sprint of the year. Now normally, the sprints do give us a glimpse of what we can expect on the Sunday, and sadly for Mercedes, that was a glimpse of a horror story, as after spending Saturday seemingly going in reverse, they did pretty much exactly the same thing come Sunday, seemingly dropping back constantly to the point where they were even legitimately battling Yuki Tsunoda and Pierre Gasly in their respective tractors. However, at least the Mercedes cars did make the race, unlike Leclerc, who crashed on the formation lap into the barrier and out before it even started. Could have at least done what Alex Albon did and wait until the start before your big incident, where he was the filling in a Haas sandwich, taking about 4 cars out of the race and bringing out a red flag early on. What did I tell you? What are the Haas cars good for? Bringing out red flags. Upon restarting though, we could get back to watching the Mercedes drop like stones, And other than that, up at the front there was a battle brewing between Fernando Alonso and Sergio Perez for the final podium place, but Alonso taking that third place on the podium, with Checo losing out this time. Just remember that for the next 2 races. So round 22 and the penultimate round of the season, one we'd all been waiting for, Las Vegas. Also the only one where I'm going to mention practice because quite frankly, it was the most disastrous in quite some time. So to set the scene, we had a new city, brand new venue on the F1 calendar, we had glitz and glamour, VIPs all over the place. And Sainz hits a loose drain cover just 5 minutes into the session, breaking his entire chassis and cancelling the rest of FP1. It then also delayed FP2 to the point where it was running from 2:30 in the morning till 4 AM, prime racing hours if you ask me, but it did mean that any fans at the venue had to be sent home as they didn't have the staff to facilitate them all at that time in the morning. So basically, long story short, Friday was a disaster. However, Saturday was just a little bit better as pole merchant Leclerc did what he did best and took pole position at the Las Vegas Grand Prix. We all know what that means, it's not going to be lasting too long come Sunday. On to the Sunday though, and before we could go racing, we had one of the most awkward moments in the history of F1 possibly ever, coming courtesy of Sergio Perez, with the pre-race announcements being taken for interviews, and well, Checo just looking like this.
I've never been on live television before.
But onto the action, and stealing lap 1 headlines was Lando Norris, and not for good reasons, as he went wall riding in dramatic fashion, smashing up his McLaren on the opening lap, out of the race and taking no further part. Up at the front though, and I think it's fair to say, Max Verstappen was pretty eager to get himself up into P1, so much so that he did it by taking himself and Charles Leclerc completely off of the racetrack. He did eventually get a 5-second penalty for this move, and later on it was served, which dropped him into the same vicinity as George Russell, a very dangerous place for anyone to be on a racetrack. And this was shown by the pair coming together as they went onto the Las Vegas Strip, with Max and George both sustaining some damage. This did make it harder for Max to get through, however apparently not hard enough, as he went passing Leclerc to take the lead of the race. And legitimately so this time, with teammate Sergio Perez deciding he'd follow suit as he got past Charles's Ferrari and made it a Red Bull 1-2, and this is how it would stand until the very last lap. As at this time, Checo seemingly forgot it was the last corner of the race and Leclerc's only chance to overtake him, with the Ferrari getting by and taking P2 to slot in behind Verstappen. If only there was like a reflective shiny surface or something that Sergio could have used to see Charles coming. And then finally onto the final race of the year, everyone's favourite venue, Abu Dhabi. And to be fair, there were a few storylines still left to be finished off, as although Red Bull and Max Verstappen had claimed the World Championships during qualifying in Bahrain, P2 was still up for grabs, in the constructors that is, as Mercedes sat just 4 points ahead of Ferrari going into the final race, the battle well and truly on. Aston Martin were also just 11 points behind McLaren, and while the media did big that one up a bit, anyone with any common sense knew that that would mean Lance Stroll scoring some points to actually give Aston a chance. And with that, McLaren finished in 4th place pretty easily. But back to the Mercedes and Ferrari battle, and Lewis Hamilton decided that this was the time of the year for him to have his worst race of the season. However, still not as bad as the race went for Carlos Sainz, as after a poor qualifying down in 16th place, Ferrari just seemingly forgot he existed on Sunday. As instead of actually trying with him, Ferrari just sent him out on hard tyres and then more hard tyres as they just messed up the strategy as usual. I know that Ferrari are Ferrari, but even this one had me confused. In the other red car though, and Leclerc was doing well, a strong P2 with, you guessed it, Max Verstappen out in front. It was actually Sergio Perez that crossed the line second after being let through by Leclerc, given that he had a 5-second penalty for colliding with Lando Norris. This penalty dropped him down to 4th behind both Leclerc and Russell once it was applied, meaning that Checo had successfully dropped podium places on the final lap of the race for 3 races in a row. That's some elite level talent right there, let me tell you that. However, George Russell finishing up in 3rd did mean that Mercedes maintained their P2 in the championship, just 3 points ahead of Ferrari. But for P1, there were never really any doubts, as 2023 will go down as one of records being broken, standards being set, new levels reached, and quite frankly, the year of Max Verstappen and Red Bull racing, that and every F1 fan being forced to learn the Dutch and Austrian national anthems. Anyways, that is all for now, thank you very much for watching, I hope you've enjoyed the 2023 season, and if you have enjoyed this video, do make sure to give it a thumbs up, leave your comments down below, get yourself subscribed to the channel, all of that good stuff, And until next time, take care.